August 30 BC. The heavy gold-plated doors of the royal mausoleum in Alexandria slam shut, sealing out the Mediterranean sun. Inside, the air is thick, suffocating with the scent of burning frankincense and cedar resin. Outside, 30 Roman legions are tearing her city apart. But at 39, the last sovereign of the Macedonian bloodline does not weep. She calmly removes the diadem from her hair, requests a basket of fresh figs, and dips a red pen into dark ink. She is drafting her final letter, addressed directly to the warlord who is currently slaughtering her people just beyond the stone. But the cruelest paradox of this war does not lie in her dying breath. When that letter reaches the Roman camp, the victorious Octavian does not celebrate the end of his greatest enemy. He panics. The cold, calculating conqueror violently orders his heavy infantry to smash the mausoleum doors. He summons the most skilled silly healers of the Mediterranean, commanding them to suck the venom from her veins at any cost. Why would the most ruthless warlord in the world desperately try to resurrect the woman he just hunted down? How could the silent corpse of one ruler completely strip a rising empire of its ultimate triumph? For 2,000 years, history has been blinded by cheap theatrical tales of tragic romance, but the brutal truth of her reign was never forged on a bed of rose petals. It was written in the bloody ledgers of grain exports, the crushing weight of gold ingots, and the violent clash of iron swords. Through empirical records reconstructed by AI technology, we will strip away the romantic illusion to confront the exact math that ground the Ptolemaic dynasty into dust. The truth is not found in poetry. It is waiting at the end of this journey. Welcome to the Trials of Greatness. I am Oxley. To grasp the sheer inevitability of this execution, we must turn our gaze away from the grand palaces and look down into the rotting, foul-smelling mud of the Tiber River. By the middle of the 1st century before Christ, the Italian peninsula is not a sanctuary of enlightened philosophy. It is a sprawling, violently insatiable mouth. 1 million people cram into the crumbling, multi-story brick insulae of Rome. Every single dawn, the stone bakeries of the capital demand thousands of tons of milled flour just to prevent the desperate plebeians from tearing the marble columns of the Senate House down to the bedrock. The massive, vaulted stone granaries at the port of Ostia are scraping the bottom. The air inside them echoes with a terrifying, hollow resonance. The patricians and warlords know the grim reality. The Republic does not march its heavily armed legions across the sea to settle petty personal vendettas, nor do they wage war for the romanticized glory of the gods. They march out of the primitive, gnawing, absolute hunger of a starving metropolis. Rome is a beast that survives exclusively by consuming the harvests of distant lands. And across the Mediterranean waters, the dark, heavy silt of the Nile River basin holds the single largest concentration of harvestable wheat in the known world. The very geography of Egypt is a death sentence, drafted in the earth long before the last queen even drew her first breath. Her kingdom is an open vault of food, waiting to be plundered by an empire that simply cannot afford to let it remain independent. The Nile River does not answer to the decrees of kings, nor does it care for the ambitions of the Roman Senate. It operates on a merciless, predictable rhythm of flood and retreat. From the deep highlands of the African continent, the inundation brings millions of tons of black, nutrient-rich earth, depositing it along the narrow, sun-baked strip of the Egyptian desert. This dark mud is the only true wealth of the ancient world. Out of it grows wheat, tall, thick, and heavy with grain, stretching for hundreds of miles along the riverbanks. But this staggering agricultural yield creates a fatal, inescapable trap for the Ptolemaic crown. The more grain the Egyptian farmers scythe beneath the brutal desert sun, the more the predators across the sea turn their eyes toward Alexandria. The endless fields of wheat do not grant the pharaohs unassailable power. They place a permanent, glowing target on their borders. Every single stalk of wheat, bundled and loaded onto the river barges, is a silent invitation to the Roman war machine. To rule Egypt during this era is to sit on a throne crafted of solid gold, completely surrounded by a pack of starving wolves whose teeth are forged from cold iron. The abundance of the land is exactly what guarantees its eventual subjugation. There is no diplomatic treaty thick enough, no wax seal heavy enough to stop an army that is marching for its next meal. The survival of the dynasty is no longer a matter of military genius. It is a brutal countdown driven by the emptying grain silos in Italy. Step inside the royal treasuries of Alexandria, and the illusion of invincibility is blinding. The heavy wooden doors open to reveal staggering accumulations of wealth. Solid gold ingots are stacked high against the limestone walls, catching the flickering light of the oil lamps. Thousands of heavy silver tetradrachms, stamped with the faces of dead kings, spill from cedar chests. By any financial metric, the queen commands the richest sovereign state on earth. But step outside the towering walls of the capital, and the truth of the Egyptian countryside reveals a fatal hemorrhage. The agricultural fields and villages are devoid of young, able-bodied men. Decades of internal dynastic strife, bloody civil wars between brothers and sisters, and relentless rebellions have completely drained the male population. The fighting age demographic has been bled dry into the sand. This is the unyielding ledger of blood that no amount of wealth can balance. Cleopatra possesses mountains of gold, but she cannot melt those gold bars and pour them into the shape of infantrymen. She cannot forge silver coins into flesh and bone. When the war horns sound, a vault full of treasure without hands to wield the spears is nothing more than a ransom waiting to be collected. The royal court operates under a crushing, unavoidable reality. They are guarding a fortress of immeasurable riches with a ghost army. The demographic ceiling has collapsed, leaving the queen with the ultimate paradox. She has all the money in the world to fund the war, and absolutely no one left to fight it. Across the Mediterranean, the counterweight to Egypt's empty fields is assembling in the mud and blood of Europe. The Roman Republic does not merely field armies, it manufactures instruments of total annihilation. Visualize the staggering scale of their force. 30 fully manned legions, 150,000 heavy infantrymen. These are not untrained conscripts pulled from the farms. These are hardened veterans forged in the freezing, brutal campaigns of Gaul. They wear heavy iron chainmail that weighs down their shoulders. They march in hobnailed leather sandals that crush the earth beneath them, moving with a disciplined, mechanical precision that terrifies the ancient world. Their primary tool is the gladius, a short, thick iron sword designed not for elegant dueling, but for the efficient, close-quarters butchery of flesh and bone. Against this massive, heavily armored tide of manpower, the remnants of the Egyptian military are erased by the sheer, crushing weight of numbers. If those 30 legions ever set foot on the soft sands of the Nile Delta, the conflict would not be a war. It would be a slaughter of apocalyptic scale. The sheer, overwhelming pressure of 150,000 marching boots creates a gravitational pull that threatens to drag the entire Ptolemaic dynasty into the abyss. The queen knows exactly what awaits her if diplomacy fails. She has read the dispatches. She knows the exact weight of the Roman shield and the deadly length of their iron spears. The saltwater distance between Alexandria and the Roman vanguard is the only thing keeping her empire breathing. Confronted with the overwhelming, crushing weight of the Roman infantry, the queen does not resort to the desperate, futile tactics of a cornered warlord. She does not order the mass conscription of peasants who would only be slaughtered in the sand. Instead, she turns to the only weapon sharp enough to hold back the iron tide, the cold, calculated weight of minted silver. She transforms the royal court into a supreme counting house. Surrounded by scribes and towering stacks of papyrus scrolls, she weaponizes the national ledger. She meticulously pays off the massive loans her father owed to Roman creditors, ensuring that the influential patricians in Italy have a vested financial interest in keeping her alive. She seals off the lucrative spice and silk trade routes of the Red Sea, tightly controlling the flow of luxury goods into Europe. Her reed pen strokes across the papyrus are as lethal as any general's command. She is not seduced by the romanticized notion of a glorious last stand. She is playing an agonizingly slow game of geopolitical extortion. By tightly gripping the financial throat of the Mediterranean trade, she attempts to buy time, turning the vast wealth of Alexandria into an invisible yet impenetrable wall against the impending Roman invasion. Every single denarius she sends across the sea is a calculated bribe to the warlords of Rome, a desperate transaction designed to keep their legions fighting each other instead of marching on her capital. She is fighting the deadliest war of her era not with drawn swords, but with meticulous, ruthlessly accurate bookkeeping. The ultimate manifestation of this strategy is not found in the grand architecture of palaces, but down at the chaotic, salt-stained docks of Alexandria. Here lies the true lifeline of the Egyptian empire. Massive, heavily timbered grain freighters, unparalleled in their sheer scale, dominate the harbor. These are the leviathans of the ancient world, each vessel capable of carrying over 1,000 tons of threshed wheat. Watch as thousands of laborers haul heavy linen sacks of grain up the wooden ramps, their backs breaking under the relentless sun. The wooden hulls of the ships groan under the immense weight, the waterline sinking precariously low into the dark blue waves. This fleet is the singular, defining barrier between survival and extinction. By continuously exporting this massive volume of wheat to the starving mobs of Rome, the Queen is effectively purchasing the loyalty of foreign fleets and the protection of heavily armed Roman warlords. The grain ships are her armor. The millions of grains of wheat resting in the holds of those vessels are the only shield preventing the brutal Roman cavalry from trampling the streets of Alexandria. She is feeding the beast every single day, fully aware that the very moment the grain stops flowing, the beast will devour her. It is an excruciatingly fragile equilibrium. She has managed to chain the survival of Rome's population to the survival of her own throne. As long as the ships keep sailing, Egypt remains an independent nation. But it is a temporary, agonizing reprieve. The math of the ancient world is unforgiving, and the debt of blood will eventually demand to be paid. Strip away the poetry of the legendary meeting at Tarsus on the river Cydnus, when the Egyptian queen sails her massive, gold-encrusted barge into the harbor, with its purple linen sails catching the wind and silver oars striking the water. She is not deploying a romantic snare. She is presenting a colossal, floating bank vault. Mark Antony, the hardened Roman warlord, possesses the raw, brute force of 30 heavily armed legions, but his upcoming military campaign into Parthia requires literal mountains of minted silver to pay his infantry. Cleopatra possesses the overflowing granaries of the Nile and the deepest treasury in the known world, but she lacks the hardened veterans to guard them. The negotiations that take place under the heavily perfumed awnings of that ship are as cold, rigid, and calculating as
but
a
ultimately
merchant's
futile.
ledger. There is no
Egypt
blind
will not
infatuation
fall.
traded here. There is only the exchange of iron and grain. Watch the heavy cedar chests stamped with the Ptolemaic falcon being hauled by sweating laborers onto the decks of Roman warships. See the thousands of bushels of harvested wheat redirected from Egyptian mouth to feed foreign soldiers. The queen is making a brutal, blood-draining transaction. She is deliberately starving the very subjects she rules, funneling the absolute wealth of her ancestors into the hands of a Roman general, strictly to rent a wall of iron shields and sharpened spears to stand between Alexandria and the ravenous jaws of the Senate. This fragile, purchased protection shatters completely on the bitter, salt-choked waters of the Ionian Sea in September 31 BC, the Battle of Actium. The official poetry commissioned by the victors will forever paint this moment as a pathetic tale of a weak, terrified foreign woman fleeing in the face of combat, dragging her doomed lover down into the abyss with her. But read the actual battlefield geometry. Smell the thick, choking black smoke of burning pine and shattered oars. Listen to the deafening, bone-rattling crack of bronze rams tearing through the hulls of heavy warships. From the high wooden deck of her massive flagship, the Antonia, the Queen observes the tactical disintegration of the Allied fleet. The vanguard is collapsing. The heavy catapults of Octavian's ships are raining flaming pitch down upon the water. The Roman naval blockade is closing in like an inescapable iron jaw, and hidden deep within the dark, reinforced wooden hold of her own vessel sits the entire war chest of the Egyptian state. Every remaining ingot of gold, every silver coin that dictates the survival of her people, is currently floating in the middle of a blazing inferno. This is the exact moment the unforgiving math of survival demands its ultimate price. The gold stacked beneath her feet represents the absolute last drops of blood in the veins of her dynasty. If that flagship sinks, or if it is boarded by Octavian's heavily armed marines, the 300-year-old kingdom is instantly and permanently erased from the map. She faces the ultimate, agonizing sacrifice. She does not hesitate. She does not sink with a failing ally out of blind, poetic devotion. With her eyes fixed coldly on the burning wreckage of Antony's center line, she gives the sharp, uncompromising order to raise the sails. She cuts a path straight through the raging inferno, abandoning the very men she had funded, leaving thousands of soldiers to drown in the churning waves. She makes the coldest, most excruciating calculation a ruler can make. She deliberately trades the annihilation of her greatest military asset in order to drag the national treasury back behind the protective limestone walls of her capital. She refuses to let the empire die on the water. But the limestone walls of Alexandria cannot hold back the crashing tide of history. By August of the following year, the Roman swords are battering the gates of the city. The final act of this sovereign is universally recorded by Roman historians as a tragic, despairing surrender, a defeated woman who lost her kingdom, choosing the bite of a serpent simply to escape the humiliation of captivity. Erase that fiction immediately. What happens inside the sealed, claustrophobic darkness of that royal mausoleum is not an act of surrender. It is the most devastating, calculated political weapon ever forged in the ancient era. To understand the sheer brutality of her final move, you must look at the unbending, ironclad laws of the Roman Republic. For Octavian to cement his absolute authority over the Senate, for him to feed the bloodlust of the Roman mob and be officially crowned the undisputed master of the world, he absolutely must execute a triumph. And the untouchable, mandatory centerpiece of a Roman triumph requires the defeated monarch, bound tightly in heavy chains of solid gold, dragged through the dirt of the capital streets before being publicly strangled to death in the Tullianum dungeon. The queen calculates this fatal vulnerability with terrifying precision. She locks the heavy golden doors not out of fear, but to steal Octavian's ultimate prize right out of his blood-stained hands. By orchestrating her own death on her own sovereign terms, surrounded by the sacred regalia of a pharaoh, utterly untouched by Roman iron, she completely destroys his moment of absolute victory. This is the exact reason why the court, calculating Octavian, violently smashes the mausoleum doors. This is why he panics and desperately commands healers to suck the venom from her still warm flesh. He is a warlord commanding 30 legions, standing over a silent corpse, realizing with horrifying clarity that he has been completely outmaneuvered. He has conquered the richest land on the face of the earth, but she has forced him to return to Rome and parade a lifeless, hollow clay statue of her through the streets. She could not defeat his massive army, but with one final, agonizing stroke of the dagger, she shatters the legitimacy of his triumph and secures the absolute final word of her own history. She died not as a captive of Rome, but as the unbreakable sovereign of Egypt. The aftermath of her final breath in the dark does not bring a simple transfer of the crown. It brings the absolute eradication of a 300-year-old kingdom. Step onto the muddy banks of the Nile in the weeks following the fall of Alexandria. You will not see diplomatic treaties being signed on parchment. You will hear the terrifying, rhythmic clanking of heavy iron chains. Thousands of skilled Egyptian artisans, stone carvers, and weathered farmers are stripped of their names, bound together in shackles, and marched directly into the dark holds of Roman slave ships. The colossal wooden water wheels of the river, which for centuries irrigated the fields for the pharaohs, now grown and turned exclusively to feed the insatiable stomach of the Roman populace. Octavian does not integrate Egypt into the Republic as a standard province. He claims the entire nation, its soil, its gold, and its grain as his res privata, his exclusive personal estate. No Roman senator is even allowed to set foot on its sands without his explicit permission. The heavy iron jaws of the empire have finally closed, swallowing the greatest agricultural engine of the ancient world whole. The blood of the land is drained to keep the capital of Italy alive. Yet, before the golden doors of the mausoleum were permanently sealed, the final sovereign of the Ptolemaic line made one last, desperate transaction. She knew the unforgiving arithmetic of ancient conquest. The victor must extinguish the bloodline of the defeated to prevent future uprisings. She did not waste her final hours weeping over lost territories or shattered fleets. Instead, she emptied the very last hidden reserves of her treasury. She placed heavy, unmarked bags of gold bullion into the calloused hands of foreign merchants, chartering a smuggler's ship to carry her eldest son, Caesarion, across the brutal expanse of the desert toward the distant ports of India. History, however, rarely honors the desperate bargains of the defeated. The gold she paid could not buy enough distance to outrun Roman iron. Caesarion was intercepted on the unforgiving sands of the road to the Red Sea. Octavian's logic was as cold as the edge of his executioner's sword. Too many Caesars is not a good thing. The boy was dragged back and ruthlessly eliminated, his blood soaking directly into the dry dust, effectively severing the direct male line of the Macedonian dynasty forever. The debt was paid in full and the toll was absolute. But the heavy, grinding gears of conquest could not crush everything. The shield she forged from her own death managed to hold just enough ground. Her daughter, Cleopatra VII, survived the brutal purge, paraded through the streets of Rome. She was not executed. Instead, she was married off to the king of Mauritania. When she crossed the Mediterranean to North Africa, she did not arrive empty-handed. She brought with her the surviving scholars, the Greek text, and the unyielding intellectual fire of Alexandria. planting the seeds of her mother's shattered empire into new soil. The queen's life had successfully purchased a surviving spark of her blood. This is the unyielding law of human history. When 30 heavily armored legions march against a single river, no amount of brilliance, no mastery of 9 languages, and no mountains of minted silver can stop the inevitable collision of iron and earth. The Queen of Egypt was crushed by the overwhelming geographical hunger of an expanding empire that simply needed her wheat more than it respected her crown. But true greatness is not measured by the ability to alter the inescapable gravity of an era. It is measured by how one stands as the ceiling collapses. She refused to let her kingdom be swallowed quietly. She weaponized her economy, she traded her own fleets, and when the swords finally breached her gates, she turned her own mortality into a dagger that robbed her conqueror of his ultimate glory. She paid the absolute price of power, retaining her sovereignty until her very last breath in the dark. The empire of the Ptolemies was ground into dust, but the weight of her defiance remains inscribed in the stone. This is the brutal method of survival. I am Oxley, and these are the trials of greatness.